is the 12th edition of the Experimental Curators Hub, and we're very excited to have all of you here in person today. It makes us reflect back, it makes all of us think about the last time we held the hub in person, which was in 2019, 3 years ago. A lot has changed in those 3 years. The world has transformed, hopefully, and some of the transformation has been our own personal transformations as well. Some of the transformations have been difficult, some of them we've accepted, and some we've now known to live with. Having said that, this hub is really a kind of a punctuation because the world is galloping ahead and we find ourselves once again stuck, or not stuck, maybe once again caught up in the storm of trying to move forward and going ahead, which is a good thing, but also maybe a point the hub possibly gives us a position or a time to create a punctuation, to stop for a little bit, to reflect, to ponder, to ask questions, to accept, but to even rethink of our models, the way we conduct ourselves, the way we imagine we can build our futures, but always to go back to questioning again. So to question and to seek answers is what really is the objective of the hub. I wrote down a few things and I'm just not going to read out of them, but I'm just going to refer to this paper for once in a while. For those of you who have been to the hub before and know how the hub is going to pan out over the next few days, thank you for coming back, and a very warm welcome back to you. You really appreciate the value of returning to the hub, which is something that builds upon you over the years, and that's great. For those of you who are new and have not come here before, there are many new faces I see. A special welcome to you all. You have really, hopefully the next 2 days are going to experience something that's going to be a little different, but also something that would be constructive, which is where we want to be. And I also want to acknowledge and recognize and think of all those people who are not here with us today, who were here with us every year of the hub for the last 9 years before the 12th edition we're doing now. We've lost them, but we hold what they say to us at the core of our being, and we remember them for what they've done. So yes, there are people who would be among us, not here. Going ahead, I think we need to take stock of where we stand today, and we constantly feel this overarching need or this kind of very hostile response these days to ideas of plurality, to ideas of multiplicity, the very core of what we stand for. The world is a shrinking space for acceptance. I feel it's becoming more singular, more polarized, and we question these polarizations always in our work, but also during these days of the hub. The last thing I want to say is we need to create a sense of fearlessness and intimate conversations where you can speak and we can speak with each other without any restrictions or without any feelings of being oppressed or suppressed, and we hope that the next few days we're able to create that space for friendship and trust and a common ground where we can discuss things that, yes, are of course rooted to exhibition making and thinking of the world, but also about thinking beyond that, and thinking beyond these four walls, and thinking how what we do impacts what everything else is around us and vice versa. So I wish you all a very constructive few days, and feel free to discuss and debate, because this is what the crux of the hub is, and really want you to participate. So please feel free to have your conversations. And yes, and then before I want to thank you all again for coming here. I'm going to hand this over to Priyanka. Next few words.
Thank you. Thank you, Prateek, and welcome to each one of you. Actually, Prateek, you really said what I thought we'd say, which happens often. We talk to each other. The last 2 years, we've realized what a huge privilege it is to be in each other's company in person. So, and I know for many of you who've made it here today, it has been a huge effort. So thank you for making that effort, because nothing is easy anymore to just sort of decide and land up somewhere. So thank you for making it. And all of those people who are joining us via live stream, we really feel blessed to have a huge online audience that joins these sessions. In the past years, there have been over 20,000 people who followed this model, and we've been quite grateful to have that support. So thank you for giving us your time. As you were saying, Prateek, the pandemic made us question many models, and internally in Experimenter, for those of you who know us, you know that we work like a collective. We often ask each other, does this model even make sense anymore? It's the 12th year from when we conceptualize the hub. And is it relevant? Is it crucial? Is it awaited? Is it needed? And we decided to ask ourselves and colleagues outside of our own structure, and seems like ever more so. Ever more so because in many ways we realize that the format even sort of deliberately or unconsciously has changed so much, including the voice of so many others, sort of reconstructing of what the hub actually means. Whose voice do we need to hear now? How do we need to think about organizing, restructuring, and making collective action really count? And so I would really urge you to think of this gathering as a possible course of thinking about ideas or avenues of alternate ways of thinking. In this exchange lies the possibility of reapplication. So if there is a way forward appropriating what is discussed in these 2 days into one's own context, we hope you find all of these exchanges useful. With this, I welcome our speakers from various corners of the world. Adi Dharma and members of Ruang Group artists, curators, and artistic directors of Documenta 15, who will be joining us online due to visa and other travel issues. So welcome to all of you. Aki Thami, artist and founder of Sister Library based in Mumbai. Ashok Sukumaran, artist and co-founder of the group and studio Camp, also based in Mumbai. Brooke, Caro Andrew, an artist and scholar, artistic director of Nirin and the 22nd Biennale of Sydney. Welcome so much. Welcome to the Hub. Hitman Gurung and Shilata Rajbandari, co-curators of the Kathmandu Triennale and the Nepal Pavilion at the Venice Biennale 2022. Welcome. Kabelo Malatsie, director to Kunsthalle Bern in Switzerland. Welcome. I know it's been a huge effort. Thank you for joining us. Tanzim Wahab, who is not here yet but has just landed. A great adventure he will tell you about his visitor, but he's made it. Festival director of Chobi Mela in Dhaka. He will be here shortly. Our guest speaker, the fabulous Karuna Nandi, advocate at the Supreme Court of India and the International Human Rights lawyer. She will be also joining us online, and we look forward to our session. Welcome to each one of you. Our deepest gratitude to Natasha. Natasha Jilwala, she doesn't need an introduction, which of course maybe later on will present for all of your reference, but Natasha really is a co-thinker, is a colleague whose mind and voice we really, really deeply appreciate and feel very grateful for what she brings to the Hub. Thank you, Natasha. The Hub would not be what it is if you weren't with us on this journey. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all our partners relentlessly over the years for 12 years in a row, depending on who we are able to invite. Our partners have, held hands with us. Australian Council of the Arts, Australian High Commission Kolkata, the Goethe Institute Kolkata, Pro Helvetia, Art Review, and Take Magazine. And then, last but not the least, Team Experimenter. Thank you, Josh, Vedi, Yaman, Aditya, Jishnu, Mohor, Shohini, and our entire extended team. We realize as we, the gallery has really grown in its functions. There are many other, responsibilities upon us now, and this team is really, really the backbone of all the work that happens. So thank you, and can we have a round of applause for them, please? As Pradeep says, the success of the Love Hub really lies in your hands, the audience. This isn't meant to be a monologue of sorts, it's really a dialogue. So please feel free to fearlessly ask questions, engage, and debate, because that is the whole point of this physical gathering. There will be many moments between conversations. Natasha will talk to you about the structure more in detail, that you will be able to have one-on-one interactions. Please make the most of this physical gathering, and I wish you all the best. And can I please request Vedi to run over the house rules and introduce Natasha?
Hello everyone, welcome to the Hub. We are so happy to have each and every one of you here today. I'm going to run over the flow of events for the day, which you can also see at the back of the booklets you've been provided when you come in. So, we'll first begin with introduction by Natasha, who will tell you a little bit about the Hub for those who are joining us and introduce the speakers as well. After that, it will be followed by a presentation by Kabelo. After Kabelo, So to share a little bit about the house rules, please do not enter or leave the venue during presentations, as it will disturb the presenter. We will adhere to the schedule with the breaks mentioned in between, and I request everybody to please stick to the clock. Please wait for the breaks before you need to enter or leave the room. All presentations are about 30 minutes in monologue and 30 minutes in dialogue. We request you to save your questions until the end of each presentation. The Hub is designed for in-depth conversations, and we encourage you to participate and ask questions and engage in dialogue. Photography and videography are both permitted, but we request you to refrain from using flash. And we recommend that you bring your own water bottles. We have water provided at the venue, and you can refill your bottles as needed. We request you to please stay until the concluding discussions of the day, and we will conclude the Hub at 5:15 p.m. today. And please keep your mobile phones on silent or switch it off at all times so as not to disturb the presenters during the Hub. And it's my pleasure to introduce Natasha, who is our friend and long-term collaborator. Natasha Jinwala is an associate curator at large at Rokis Bao, Berlin, the artistic director of Columboscope in Sri Lanka, and the 13th Guangzhou Biennial with Daphne Ayers. Jinwala has curated Contour Biennial 8 and Polyphonic Words Justice as Medium, and was part of the curatorial team at Documenta 14, 2017. Her other projects include Indigo Waves and Other Stories, Re-Navigating the Afro-Asian Sea, and Notions of Diaspora with Bonaventure So, Beijing, Ndiko, and Michelangelo Corsaro at Zai Snoka. Her survey exhibitions with Bania Bedi, Akinbore Akinbi, and Zalili Muheli at Rokis Bao. Jinwala was a member of the artistic team for the 8th Berlin Biennial for Contemporary Art 2014, and has co-curated the Museum of Rhythm at Taipei Biennial in 2012, and at Museum Suki Lodz at 2016 and 17. Jinwala has written regularly on contemporary art and visual culture. Her recent co-edited volumes include Stronger Than Bone, Archive Books, and Guangzhou Biennial Foundation, and Nights of the Dispossessed, Riots Unbound, published by Columbia University Press. Thank you, Natasha, and I hand over the mic to you.
With that, very pleased to welcome Kabelo Malatsie, a curator and organizer living in Bern, where she has recently become director of Kunsthalle Bern as of April this year. Her ongoing curatorial research project explores the exhibitionary mode as unlikely starting points that place incongruous practices together to instigate other ways of making and reading the world we inhabit. As an organizer, she's preoccupied with the notion of autonomy and the underground. She was the director of Visual Arts Network of South Africa and an associate in the curatorial team at Stevenson Gallery in Cape Town and Johannesburg. She has co-curated the exhibition Deliberation on Discursive Justice with Rux Media Collective for Yokohama Triennale, and we've had Rux present that project as part of the hub, so it will be great to dig deeper into that of their collaborators, such as Kabelo, who also worked with them on an earlier occasion for the exhibition in the open or in stealth at Barcelona's MACBA. Kabelo has worked closely with various institutions in South Africa and artists such as Nicholas Lobo, Moshekwa Langa, and Sabelo Mlangani. And we look forward so much to hearing of your work and listening to also continuing this sonic generosity and gifts.
Thank you for the invitation, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm gonna start, or rather have two parts of the presentation. So I'll first do something I call sonic formations. This feedback. And this one is called sonic formations, second note, another sketch. Joshua, can you please play Sister Rosetta's The Strain from Precious Memory?
Precious memories? No? Lonesome Road? This train? And I'm going to see how many going to ride on it. This train is a clean train. This train. This train is a clean train. This train. This train is a clean train. Everybody ride it in Jesus' name. This train is a clean train. This train. This train is bound for glory. This train. This train, Brother Spain, is bound for glory. You know this train. This train is bound for glory. Everybody right here got to be holy, because this train is a clean train. This train. But this train don't pull no liars. This train, you got to get off. This train don't pull no liars. This train. You know this train don't pull no liars, no false pretenders, and no backbiter, because this train is a clean train. This train. winkers, this train. I said this train. Don't pull no winkers, this train. No, 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 this train. Don't pull no winkers, no crap shooter, and no whiskey drinkers. It's a clean train, this train. You know this train. Don't pull no jokers, this train. This train. Don't pull no jokers, this train. This train. Don't pull no jokers, no tobacco chewers, and no cigar smokers, because this train is a clean train. You know this train. Let's ride the train. This train is on the way to glory. This train. Yeah, this train is on the way to glory. Ooh, this train. You know this train is on the way to glory. Everybody right here, they got to be holy, holy. This train is a clean train. This train.
I was born in 1987 in apartheid South Africa. It is the year that Sister Rosetta Tharpe's Precious Memory album was released. She is well known and celebrated in gospel music. However, she has not received as much recognition for being the godmother of rock and roll. If you listen closely to her oeuvre, you can hear a lot of the well-known rock artists who borrowed, or should I say stolen, heavily from her. This form that I'm using is inspired by Dineo Seshewu Pape's short biography, where she puts her birth year in relation to global occurrences. I borrow this form in this presentation and pepper unrelated global events that took place in the year I was born. February 23. CN 1987A, the first naked eye supernova since 1604, was observed. Sakosha Kelerole is Bupape's work that looks at the history of the Polokwane Choral Society, founded in 1977. Both of Bupape's parents were part of the choir as conductor and chorister. Choral music is important in South African history. It's significant as one of the early spaces of anti-colonial and anti-apartheid formations. The Polokwane Choral Society builds on a rich history of community organization held through and by choral music. Andy Warhol died in Manhattan at 6:32 a.m. on February 22nd. According to time zones, he died some 2 hours before my first breath. Charlotte Mahomu Nehemiah Matseke is believed to have been born in 1874 in Petersburg, now Polokwane. She was a South African religious leader, social and political activist, and a formidable fighter of women and black people's rights. As a dedicated churchgoer, Matseke and her sister Katie joined the African Jubilee Choir in 1891 and toured England for 2 years. Matseke went on a second tour to the United States of America, where she pursued her studies. She was the first black South African woman to graduate with a university degree. She received a Bachelor of Science from Wilberforce University, Ohio in 1903, and she was taught under W.E. Du Bois. She was the only woman in the room at the founding meeting of the SANNC, now ANC, on 8 January 1912. July 4th, a court in Lyon sentences Klaus Barbie, a German soldier and Gestapo member, for war crimes committed during World War II. He is sentenced to life imprisonment for crimes against humanity. You can also hear a lot of Aretha Franklin in the vocals of Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Aretha Franklin's Memory Don't You Weep is an itinerant song that has its history linked to the US slave trade. It has been covered by many musicians, among them the Staple Singers, the Caravans, Trinity verse 5, chapter 7, James Brown, Nat King Cole, Bruce Springsteen, and many others. Franklin and Prince are the ones I listen to repeatedly. The first recording of the song is by First Jubilee Singers, dating to 1915. Mary Don't You Weep inspired a Spotify playlist and a text both titled Sonic Formation's First Note, which was published in 2022 by the Van Abbe Museum. February 24th. Whitney Houston wins a Grammy for her song, I Wanna Dance with Somebody Who Loves Me. Back to Sister Rosetta Tharpe. She was born in 1915 and passed away in 1973.
All right.
Review the story of two sisters. For Mary and Martha, they had a brother. Named Lazarus.
27 to 21, the first conference on artificial life is held at Los Alamos National Laboratory in the United States. Side note, Lagos operates daily on a hum. A constant humming produced by the generators is on average between 60 to 70 decibels. The number of generators possibly increases this number as the generators are a citywide need. Silence or the romantic quiet of the night is not possible in Lagos. Various engine sounds, hooting, and traffic are often read as the pulse of a city. The relentless, constant hum of generators, audible but not too disturbing, adds another layer, tuning the body to a particular frequency, to an unknowable end. Play the next one. You will now listen to a performance on 200 Borindos by Fakir, Zulfikar, and Ala Jurio. On 14 October, Nobel Prize in Physics was jointly awarded to Dr. Johannes George Bednorz and Professor Dr. Carl Alexander Müller for their important breakthrough in the rediscovery of superconductivity in ceramic materials. I will now read a mistranslation of my grandfather's anecdotes. You would hear a sound and know the cows were on their way home. They would make a sound with kitoringo, kwe kwe kwe. The herders would be on top of a makaba, a small cow that you can ride. They would whistle and the cows would know it's time to go home. Each one of us chose a specific type of whistle. You whistled once and they would come to drink water, and you'd whistle again and they would disperse. And the final whistle would have the leader cow show the head the way back home to the kraal. Footnote, I speak Kilobedu, a language in South Africa that is not part of the official languages. And at the time of the mistranslating the anecdote, there was no standard orthography. Now there are efforts to rectify this, still on a small scale, by small non-profit organization and some individual effort. November 22, Max Headroom broadcast signal intrusion. Unknown perpetrators hijacked the signal of WGN-TV for about 20 seconds and WTTW for about 90 seconds and display a video of a man in a Max Headroom mask. January 22, Airbus A320 takeoff for the first time. I will now read a quote by Kodo Eshun that has followed me for the past 2 years, informing and framing my curatorial practice, taking shapes such as exhibition text, playlists, sonic and textual essays, stories, and talks. Sonic Formations is a form and carrier that thinks about itinerant and embodied practice that have been echoing through times. Open quote. Listening to oneself listening to emotions and frictions of emotions. And then one has to decide what those frictions of emotions are. What is the tension they're generating, the rub between them. And then one has to name them, naming the parameters of emotions, because you want to get the modulations of emotion. Listening to the act of your own listening, but also how this bounces back from the other. Most of the time, that's what it's all about, end quote. Thank you.
Thanks, Kabelo. I'm going to start off the discussion and then we're going to enter dialogue mode. So there will be a mic circulating for you all to add your voices in. I'd like to go back to your time working with Vansa, particularly sort of also the kind of structural challenges that you were seeking to tackle, which also would perhaps create more security for artists, and perhaps the failures of the possibilities within this kind of setup, or where the notion of autonomous learning felt like it was rooted and still a possibility during your work there.
Yeah, Vansa is a very, I think, important space in South Africa, and I think the form of associations is interesting worldwide. Essentially, it was started by artists some while back, maybe more than 10 years ago, and it was artists from all over the country, and the idea was to form a body that would actually do things like lobbying government, and this was because in South Africa, I mean, at the time and still now, there is government funding, but it's not properly getting to the places that it needs to. And also, I think visual artists on government level are not as understood and heard as other artists in various disciplines, musicians or actors. And so Vansa was filling that gap on the one hand. And through different directors, each one was kind of like deciding whether it was exhibitions, that was exhibition space, and providing that, or if it was any other kind of gap. And when I was there, I mean, I must say that my time at Vansa was very short. We were working on issues of mental health, and also there was this bill called Artist Rights that we were trying to get to Parliament. And the mental health work was about actually thinking, firstly for artists, this is like trying to get some data, statistics, having professionals study the visual arts and what the mental health issues are. So having a tool that artists can like look at, and also a tool for their families, because often the misconception is that artistic practitioners are eccentric. So one doesn't quite have the range that actually now it's a mental health issue and not just one being eccentric. Or, and also that as practitioners, we must think about the infrastructures that we are building that in some ways would increase the propensity of having a mental health issue. Like residencies, even though they are great, they are also spaces of alienation, and whether when you're moving to a place and when you come back. So there's I guess the entry and re-entry can be spaces of anxiety for artists. So thinking about like different aspects of it. And the other thing was also hoping that this these statistics we could then take back to government and say that you are not thinking about visual artists within medical insurance, and this is actually how you think of it. Like, these are the tools, this is the work they do, this is how, like, just giving them some tools is what we were thinking about. So in a sense, that infrastructural work I've taken into curatorial practice. So maybe not in the terms of like lobbying or anything, but thinking about hosting artists differently, or maybe not differently, but being sensitive.
And if we could go into the episode on discursive justice as part of the Yokohama Triennale, I really enjoyed even just reading the conceptual note for it, and particularly in light of the discussion later today with Karuna Nandi, I'm just quoting from that note, which states that tributary draws from the insights of a minor strand in legal theory, which engages with the way people have been able to transform the courtrooms as forums to speak, and have been able to have been making this act of speech itself as the site for claims to justice, and the kind of larger sense of hearings and the polyphonies that surround and move far, far away from sort of legal infrastructures. These are points of interest, of course, within what the work that you did, and I also wonder, in terms of what you also just said, in terms of creating access by recognizing some of the slippery ways in which certain notions are defined precisely within also the artistic space. I wonder how this work on discursive justice may also move beyond the Triennale into other facets of practice for you.
I think it has, because I still refer to the materials that we brought together for that practice. And also, I mean, I think maybe a distinction that I'm kind of also drawing is with this, it's about listening and not hearing. And hearing is, for me, about representation, because to be heard, you require somebody to firstly have like an ability to hear you, to understand how you speak. And so, and within this is where I guess maybe also the court is problematic as a colonial institution that is unable to hear, or maybe it refuses to hear other voices, languages, and so that is still there. But I'm also going into the spaces of listening, because that is internal. Not to say that hearing is not internal, but listening is about listening to yourself and the world around you. And so it's not necessarily trying to maybe transmit to another person, but rather like taking something in. I don't know if I'm answering. Just kind of waffling.
You've referred to the writer Bessie Head in one of your interviews, and I'm interested in the way this phenomenal author engaged with practices like community gardening as a critical act to tackle land politics, segregation, and racialized violence. She's also noted, a discipline I have observed is an attitude of love and reverence to people. And so in relationship to apartheid South Africa, but also her own exile, her own exit, that has since then also been such an important form of witnessing this figure through other artistic practices. More recently, in South Africa, it'd be great to kind of listen, to you speak about those, perhaps.
I think Bessie Head is, of course, a phenomenal writer, and I was saying earlier to you that we studied her in high school. And so, in a sense, she's part of our thinking, but what I was interested in was her practice on gardening. And that was me trying to think about, like, forms of practice that don't have to always go into the exhibitionary. So like what nurtures you, what you do, but I mean, of course you show it, you have a garden, but not to try and take that practice into the exhibition by bringing in plants in and be like, I'm gardening. No? So I'm trying to think about those forms of practice, like how do we deal with dinners and gardening and all of these host of practices that are happening around us without always trying to force everything into an exhibition. So like, what bridge or how do we tackle them? So for me, I'm trying to draw that out. I don't know how, but that's where I'm thinking about Bessie Head's practice as maybe the people that were in the community were not thinking about her as this phenomenal writer, but actually this person that they are in constant conversation with around plants and more. No? And also thinking about like the philosophy of life, not as something that, or maybe not the philosophy of life, but rather that philosophy doesn't have to be something that happens in a particular space. It can happen while gardening. So, but I don't have a form yet. This is, she's just orbiting. She's in my head, inspiring this kind of thinking. Yeah.
We're going to open up. So just like, yeah, please make yourselves known for any questions or thoughts. I'll keep going till you do that. So, as a cultural organizer, how do you envision your role at the Kunsthalle Bern, given that it speaks to a very specific strand of exhibition history, and also its role in the artistic landscape of Switzerland today? In 2020 and 2021, more than 60 Black artists and cultural workers based in Switzerland signed a critical open letter to art spaces in Switzerland with a statement, the need for a deeper confrontation with structural blind spots rooted in white supremacy and resulting in anti-Blackness. It's a demand, a call for recognition perhaps, but also it's you entering this space with your own history, and that is also perhaps, I mean, I'd imagine something heavy to take on in a new context. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, you know, in the spirit of that friendship and recollection that nourishes you, how do you intend to take on that responsibility, not only with exhibitions, but, you know, as you say, with your process?
I'm not going to take on the responsibility. Firstly, not because I'm being facetious or anything, but rather that to take on the responsibility, I would have to understand that. And I mean, I've been there 5-6 months, never lived in Switzerland. Besides the obvious things like banking and chocolate and Nestle, I don't know much about it. And so to take on the responsibility would be kind of like window dressing or like something that is not sincere. So that's what I mean, that I won't take it on. But I hope that in my being there can be a dialogue around, I guess I'm calling it inheritance. And the inheritance within exhibition making, within directorships, inheriting accounting, Excel spreadsheets, cleaning, you know, we inherit a lot. We just walk into a space and then they say we clean this way and you accept it. Or this is how we drop a budget and you accept it. So I'm hoping to maybe like think even about those small little things, like those things that we inherit, and see if those inheritance actually are the problematic things. If those don't perpetuate a way of exhibition making that's exclusionary. Because it's not just, like for me, holding space for an artistic work has to be even with the small thing of, or maybe not so small, cleaning and, I mean, maybe the budgets are a bit big, but cleaning as well, like food culture, and like how people host, how they welcome, and all of these things. And the other thing that I'm like holding dear is the Saharan dust storms. The Saharan dust storm comes from an ancient lake. Scientists don't really know when it started. It was a lake which dried up, and probably was a climate catastrophe at the time. But this dust storm has been going on yearly for many, many decades. And it's literally, I think, why we are still breathing, because it feeds the Amazon. But the other thing interesting for me is that it's non-binary. So it's not that it's only good. It also is toxic. It's also old. It's also current. So it does a whole lot in terms of like my thinking around practice, which is not, also it's not human scale, so it's not 100 years, it's beyond that, it's thousands, it's probably even billions of years. So I'm trying to kind of like, not use it as a theme, but rather as a way of thinking, as a way of inhabiting space. So it's probably going to be like nourishing me beyond Kunsthalle directorship, this way of thinking. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll send the mic there. Ashok, maybe the one behind then Ashok. Or if the mic is easy to be sent down. You could introduce yourself.
Hello. The mic is on?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? This is Roy, Debuyuti Roy. Myself is an artist. So my question would be like from the point of view of an artist, of course. And I think that curators are more important because, not more important, they are equally important because artists are more emotional. And the bridge between them to the practical world is curators, I think. So that's the biggest bridge that you people are building between the artist and the practical world. But if I go back to the history, like if you, I'll take you back to 100 years back, like when Henri Matisse created, or Monet created that painting of sunset, and that was like thrown out of the French Biennale, I think, because it was not selected at that time. Because artists, the genius artists, always having a propensity, like curiosity or some sort of activity, like they do the things somewhere it is ahead of time. When the genius artists are doing the work. So like if you talk about Picasso, if you talk about Matisse, if you talk about the Dada, movement Dada, which happened, if you talk about the work by Jackson Pollock even, at that point of time, that artist was not picked up by the curators of that time. So do you think that this is the biggest challenge for a curator to pick somebody from the artist group who is thinking ahead of time? So what do you think about this?
You get his question?
How to pick an artist who's ahead of time?
Or maybe be like...
I mean, yeah, I guess it would be great for Kabelo to answer this one, but...
Anybody of you can answer, it's just a curiosity. Because
artists being, I guess, is it you're also sort of thinking about artists who've been rejected from certain kinds of international systems,
Yep.
from exhibitions, and this later realization that they have been ahead of their times, and what it means for a curator to perhaps sense into that.
I mean, yeah, it's a bit difficult, no? But I think maybe I would say personally, I don't know if I have that foresight. It would be great if I had it. But at the moment, I would say my challenge is to actually write for practices that are not canonized. So maybe not in the kind of like, this is the this future person is happening. But right now, there are artists who are not canonized, and curators and art historians are not the most risk-taking humans. So often we need others who've actually said something, like formidable for us to take. So I would say it's to write for those practices, but also in writing for those practices, not to use forms of validations that are exclusionary, right? So, which is hard, because the very thing that validates also has like those residues of violence. So how do you kind of write for that without, without recreating the very thing that you're trying to subvert? So that's the challenge. And so in a sense, when I'm writing exhibition text, I'm trying with all my might not to use the art historical muscle of like referencing, whether it's Picasso, who is problematic, but if you just put Picasso's name, nobody will question you, right? But he's problematic on very many levels. But it's also easy to use Picasso. So then it's like the hard road of writing without relying on those easy validations. So that's that's what I'm doing, and this is why like trying to understand Bessie's practice without bringing it in as an exhibition is something I'm trying to think about, because there are these many practices, right? Like all over the world. People are practicing this way. People are thinking about life and philosophy in these ways. So how does that, how do we write about that without having to first put it in the exhibition and be like, this gardener is also thinking about, and not, but within this space, I can now write about them. Can I write about them while wherever they are? So I don't know if I'm making sense to you, but this is what I'm trying to do.
Ashok?
Yeah, just to say it was exciting to begin with song. And then I had this response which I was sort of sharing with Aki that, and this is not a really theoretical problem, but I was longing for the lyric video in both your, right? So I'm saying that, so what do you think, like, if we are talking about a song that has words, and you're playing it for, say, an audience like this, where does reading, or in this case, just following lyrics of Aretha Franklin in Los Angeles in 1972, help me to not alienate myself from some of this, because there's some thin thread of English that connects us in this room to her spirit. So I'm just wondering what you think about lyric videos in this context. Listening and reading together, if that ever came up in as a curatorial problem or in your social life.
Yeah. I think I did mention that I speak this language that is not official. So in a sense, and English is not my first language, it's my third. So mistranslation is a space I inhabit. And what I found generative about the sonic, even though there are words, is that it also goes or can go beyond words, or let me say understanding and relying on words. Because even if you can read, there is the propensity of misunderstanding and many misses. And for me, that's not a problem to like stay in the kind of like those cracks or like of misunderstanding, because I think the song can operate beyond that kind of understanding. And so that's for me where the sonic, it's more an embodied listening than a kind of, I don't want to say the brain is not part of the body, but you know what I mean, like the mind, because when you're reading, it's now another level of trying to understand, where when it's embodied, it's the mind and the other senses, and we don't always, we can't always articulate what we're feeling. So for me, performance and sonic art actually poses that challenge of you can't always articulate what you've just felt, but you felt something.
It was more like a karaoke sort of question.
Okay.
Thank you. This is great. I'm very curious about how you found like the private sector, like in Stevenson Gallery, and really you call yourself an organizer as well as a curator. I mean, your presentation has very much been about being a creative, an artist, the way you think, your kind of the music you played, the way you talk about language. I mean, you're very free within that creative expression, which is fresh and it's great and it's not hierarchical and it doesn't buy into the kind of complexity of the kind of European broken system of artist genius. Obviously that's what we're here to kind of not talk about as well. But I'm very curious about the decisions or your own pathway of weaving into like the private sector, then out of the private sector, and all of a sudden landing in Switzerland. And here we are in Calcutta. And so, yeah, I'm very kind of curious about how you navigate those spaces.
It's kind of like been a sort of meandering work or life. So I studied BCom marketing, family, and I'm happy to keep telling the world this because it embarrasses my family, but they didn't believe the arts, I could make a living from the arts, so they forced me to study something, which was BCom marketing. And I left BCom, like when I finished my undergrad, I then thought I was interested in art, and thankfully I'm not an artist, so I then thought, what can I do? And then curating came up, and I went the slow route into it because I wasn't sure. And then I needed to make money, and then I looked for a job. And in South Africa, the way things are, commercial galleries are probably where you can find a job. And I found a job at Stevenson. And it was a very great time. I mean, I got to travel, met a lot of artists, met a lot of curators, had an understanding from a commercial gallery perspective of all of these institutions. But when I was there are not so many. I mean, now there are a little bit more galleries than when I was working in the galleries. There are lots of artists who don't have space to show. And the gallery also shouldn't and can't absorb everyone. And so then working at the galleries became something that I couldn't do anymore because there were all these other practices. I also thought that young artists shouldn't be showing so early on in their career, or maybe not showing, but being represented by galleries too early. And so I then started thinking I need to go and see how else. And so I left to study, to do my master's on independent spaces. And autonomy was, of course, an utopian idea. So like, how does one foster autonomy? Are the institutions, the artist-run spaces, autonomous? How and when do they lose autonomy? Like, what is the friction around that? There was also like, in Africa especially, like the local government is bad. So often it is that, you know, the local government comes with censorship and all of these things, but then you're getting money from foreign governments. So then it was also this tension of, you know, one glorifies one government versus another government. And I mean, there's a very, I think, incredible text in Raw Materials book, which I forget what it's called, Condition Report. One of the Goethe directors boldly, and I love that she was bold, writes that Africa has inexhaustible resources, and and she's pitting Europe against China, and so they have to stay in Africa, right? So this, my master's was actually trying to think about these structures that are there that we have to access in order to experiment, to think about what we are doing, or to actually have resources to do what we want to do, and that tension. So that's how I kind of moved into artist-run spaces. And as luck would have it, when I was finishing my master's, the job for Vanza came up, and somebody was like, would you like to apply? I was like, never thought about it, sure. So I applied, I got the job, and so then I got an even wider understanding of the art world, which I wasn't seeing when I was at the commercial gallery, which was very incredible actually. Practices that are embedded within the local, practices that are really thinking about this inheritance of, what I was saying about Excel spreadsheets, accounting, formalization, constantly questioning these. And also getting a network to practitioners from all over the world. And then, again, this job came up and somebody said, why don't you apply? And I was like, never thought of Switzerland, but why not? And here we are. So it wasn't I didn't have a master plan. I didn't have 10 years from now, I will start here, and I just moved, yeah.
One last question, and we'll do one. Who introduces us?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It was so enlightening. Even though I'm not an artist, I'm a writer, but I think that there's a lot of similar things that I think about and we think about. And the thing with writers is that we live and work in isolation, so it's super nice to not be shut up in my room. My name is Sharanya, sorry. So I had a question. I loved what you said about hearing and there being established formats for kind of the people that we are programmed to hear everywhere in the world. As a writer, I face this when I write, but I think about who I hear when I reference or who I'm inspired by. So I was wondering if you had any, what are some of the modes that we can contest these, who we choose to hear, who we choose to give legitimacy. And I also see in my work, for example, if I write a nonfiction story about agricultural agency, and if I kind of if I quote a farmer, oftentimes editors will say, oh, but ask an expert, as if the person working the land is not an expert. Just because people are not attuned to hearing, thinking about certain people in this subcontinent with legitimacy, I think we really have a long way to go. So I was wondering if you had any kind of, in your life, in your work, if you've come across ways to kind of contest who we are, how we do, and I think I'd be glad to know.
I mean, it's a little bit difficult. One, at the moment, I'm trying not to use bios. And the use of bios is, for me, so maybe let me say with, I think Massimiliano Gianni's Venice biennial, I don't remember which year, but it was called something encyclopedic something. And he was, he included practitioners that were not artists, which is great. But the bio was then, for me, the space of contention, because the artists were born somewhere, they studied, they had a wonderful professional life. The practitioners that are not formalized artists went to primary school. They had children, so their very personal life came into that space. And so then there was a clear hierarchy on who is professional and who is, So I've had this question of, if you are going to include people who are not supposed experts, supposed professionals, it's not a question of time that they've spent thinking about something, no? It's what is the validation and what modes of validation do we use? I don't have an answer. At the moment, I just don't use bios. I use people's names. And this is to just also, because I don't know yet how to write in a way that would validate enough these practices that we are trying to insert into this, I guess, colonial system. Let's not even call it anything but colonial system, because the validation is colonial, no? So now I'm just using people's names. If any, I'm the validation because I currently have the job. I'm the stamp. Let's see how long that lasts. But I'm sorry, I don't have more of when you find it, share it with me. I also need it.
There is one more question, but I would request, it's also a way of keeping you in the room with us. We're going to have tomorrow a closing discussion, and that's a very important moment also to bring back, to do the memory work. So keep your questions and connect it to other participants as well, because that's something that we really welcome, so that we have questions for each individual, but then we also think a little bit through the day of how they might connect to each other and how they may also radically differ from each other. And so in closing, Kabelo, I wanted to also mention the work of Chimurenga by way of a publication of theirs called Home is Where the Music Is by Uhuru Falafala, because I think it recalls an important perspective. When you talked about the biography and we've spoken about certain figures, but the way that she comes into conversation with certain jazz musicians and poets while also writing the matriarchive is the crate we dig to know and define ourselves away from Western eyes. The matriarchive inspires Fred Moten to proclaim Black culture is in many ways a maternal culture. It is a maternal insurgency. And I really love this idea of a matriarchive because it really also troubles and destabilizes certain kinds of hierarchies. We were speaking in the car about how so many elements of our daily lives are not designed for women's bodies and other types of gender diverse bodies. And so I do think that within this form of recognition and also thinking beyond the human timeline, how do we want to perhaps acknowledge also this kind of archive?
I thank you for that reference. Uhuru Palafala is great. She also is thinking about writing and beyond, I guess, kind of like written form, thinking about hip hop and spoken word. I guess spoken word is a bit more formal, but thinking about hip hop as well and performance and many other mediums. And she's thinking about orality, or she writes about orality as itself a text. And I think the work that she's doing is really incredible, also because she's an academic. I can easily just use her name to validate the things that I'm doing. So thank you for that. Yeah, she's somebody that I'm thinking about and around also. Because also the work that she's doing, even though I guess in South Africa specifically, most of the jazz musicians are men, she's also thinking about what they're drawing from, and they're often drawing from women's work. And so in a way, she's writing those women into the practices that we are all kind of like consuming a lot. Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
for
you so
starting us
much.
off.